There are stories that refuse to disappear, not because they've been proven, but because they've never been fully forgotten. Atlantis, Lemuria, two names that echo through time, appearing in myths, philosophies, and fringe theories alike. Most people place them in the same category as legends, lost worlds, imagined civilizations, ancient storytelling trying to make sense of a past we don't remember. And to be fair, that's the safest assumption. There are no ruins you can visit, no artifacts you can point to with certainty, no clear place on a map where you can say, it was right there. So the conclusion is simple: they didn't exist. Case closed, mystery solved, humanity undefeated. But every so often, a different kind of source makes a different kind of claim. Not a myth, not a legend, not a guess. A statement, delivered plainly, without drama, without insistence, just as fact. In the material known as the Law of One, these civilizations are not described as possibilities. They are described as history, and not just history, but a pattern that raises a much more uncomfortable question. Not whether Atlantis and Lemuria existed, but what happened to them. Because according to this material, one of these civilizations did not fall because of nature, but because of itself. And if that's true, then the real story isn't about the past. It's about a choice, a very specific kind of choice. One that, according to this perspective, doesn't just shape individuals, but entire civilizations. And apparently, some civilizations don't survive the consequences. Long before Atlantis became a mystery, it was a story. The earliest known account comes from the Greek philosopher Plato, writing over 2,300 years ago. In two of his dialogues, Timaeus and Critias, he describes a powerful island civilization, one that existed far beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar. According to Plato, Atlantis was vast, advanced, and organized. A maritime power with impressive architecture, a complex society, and immense influence. And then, it was gone. In one sentence, Plato describes its end. In a single day and night of misfortune, the island of Atlantis disappeared into the depths of the sea. Just like that. No gradual decline, no long collapse, just disappearance. For centuries, the story was treated as philosophy, an allegory, a cautionary tale about pride, power, and downfall. But over time, something strange began to happen. People started asking a different question. What if Plato wasn't inventing a story, but recording one? And that question opened the door to speculation. A lot of it. Over the years, Atlantis has been found, quote unquote, in just about every corner of the planet. In the waters near Bimini in the Bahamas, where unusual underwater rock formations sparked decades of debate. In the sands of the Reshat structure, a massive circular formation in the Sahara Desert, visible from space. Along the coasts of Portugal and throughout the Mediterranean, even beneath Antarctica, depending on who you ask. Each theory comes with evidence, and each theory has problems. Because despite centuries of searching, there is still no definitive proof, no universally accepted location, no discovery that settles the question once and for all. So the modern conclusion remains: Atlantis is a myth, a story created by a philosopher to illustrate ideas about society, morality, and collapse, which, to be fair, is a very on-brand thing for a philosopher to do. And Lemuria? That story arrives much later, not from ancient Greece, but from 19th century speculation. A proposed lost continent in the Indian or Pacific Ocean, originally suggested to explain similarities in animal species across distant lands, lemurs to be exact. But like Atlantis, no physical evidence was ever confirmed for the lost continent. And over time, Lemuria joined the same category: myth, legend, speculation, stories we tell because something about them feels familiar, even if we can't explain why. And for most people, that's where the conversation ends. But according to the Law of One, this is where the story actually begins. Because in this material, Atlantis and Lemuria are not treated as symbols. They are treated as events, with timelines, with consequences, and with a very specific kind of lesson. Not about whether they existed, but about what they did and what followed. Up to this point, everything about Atlantis and Lemuria lives in uncertainty. Stories, interpretations, possibilities. But in the Law of One material, there's no ambiguity, no speculation, no debate. Only a question and an answer. When asked directly about these civilizations, Ra does not treat them as a metaphor. Ra answers directly, The civilizations of Atlantis and Lemuria were not one, but two. No hedging, no symbolic framing, no attempt to soften the claim. Just a plain answer. Atlantis existed, Lemuria existed. And then Ra does something even more interesting. Instead of defending the claim, they begin describing them. Ra places Lemuria far earlier than Atlantis, not thousands of years ago, but tens of thousands. The Lemurian civilization was one which was of a very early nature, approximately 53,000 years ago. 53,000 years ago, long before recorded history, long before anything we would normally consider civilization. And according to Ra, Lemuria was not highly technological, it was something else. They were beings of a somewhat primitive nature, but those who had very advanced spiritual distortions. Primitive by our standards, but not disconnected. There was a kind of alignment there, a natural relationship with energy, with environment, with each other. Not advanced in machinery, but not necessarily lacking in understanding. Different doesn't always mean less. And then something happened. Not war, not internal collapse, but a planetary event. Lemuria was a helpful and harmless place which was washed beneath the ocean during a readjustment of your sphere's tectonic plates through no action of their own. Washed beneath the ocean, not because of distortion, not because of misuse, but because of the planet itself. And yet, the story doesn't end there. They set out those who survived and reached many places in what you call Russia, North America, and South America. The Indians of whom you have come to feel some sympathy in your social complex distortions are the descendants of these entities. They continued, moved, resettled. The civilization ended, but the people did not. And this is important, because Lemuria did not fall due to choice. It did not collapse under its own direction. It was interrupted. And that distinction sets the stage for something else. Another civilization, another timeline, another outcome. One that, according to Ra, was not shaped by the planet, but by the path it began to take. And just to be clear, within this framework, there are no wrong quote-unquote paths. Only different orientations, different distortions, different choices. But some choices carry consequences that unfold in very specific ways, and the next civilization is where that begins to matter. After the fall of Lemuria, time passes, lots of time. Civilizations rise and disappear, largely unnoticed by what we now call history, and then another civilization emerges. Not as early as Lemuria, but still far beyond what we consider recorded time. According to Ra, the Atlantean civilization started about 31,000 years ago, and by 15,000 years ago, it reached a highly advanced technological understanding. But not in the way we usually imagine. Not just structures, not just cities, not just tools, something else. A different kind of understanding. Ra describes Atlantis as a civilization that had gained access to what they call intelligent energy. And they began using this energy to turn their distortions towards what you may call the negative. Which implies something important. At least in the beginning, there was balance. There was alignment. There was an ability to work with energy without immediately turning it towards control. Which, historically speaking, is already a pretty impressive start. According to Ra, this wasn't abstract knowledge. It was practical. They were able to use intelligent infinity to create life forms. Create life forms. Not observe, not study, create. And not only that, they also were able to use intelligent energy in such a way as to manipulate greatly the natural influxes of the indigo ray or pineal energy. This is where things begin to shift. Because now we're not just talking about a civilization that understands energy, but one that can direct it, amplify it, work with it at a level that begins to blur the line between understanding and control. And for a time, this knowledge was used with relatively little distortion. There was still some degree of balance, but then the wars began. Approximately 11,000 of your years ago, the first of the what you call wars caused approximately 40% of this population to leave the density by means of disintegration of the body. The second and most devastating of the conflicts occurred approximately 10821, 10,821 years in the past according to your illusion. This created an earth-changing configuration, and a large part of Atlantis was no more, having been inundated. 40% gone. Not through disease, not through natural disaster, through conflict. And then, again, a second war, more devastating. Not just loss of life, but planetary consequence. an earth-changing configuration, something powerful enough to affect the planet itself. And just like that, a civilization described as advanced was no more. Not gradually, not symbolically, but physically, geologically, gone. And this is where the story becomes very precise, because Ra does not describe this as random. They describe it as a result of something. Not punishment, not judgment, but consequence. And within this framework, there are no wrong paths, only choices, only directions consciousness can take. But some directions, when paired with power, begin to amplify themselves, until what was once understanding becomes something else. But not all were lost. 3 of the positively oriented of the Atlantean groups left this geographical locus before that devastation, placing themselves in the mountain areas of what you call Tibet, what you call Peru, and what you call Turkey. Some left before the end, not randomly, but intentionally, to higher ground, to more stable regions, to continue elsewhere, which is either incredible foresight or the ancient version of, we should probably get out of here. And then the rest was no more. And whatever Atlantis was doing, it was powerful enough to destroy itself. So what exactly were they doing? Because Ra is very clear about the outcome: war, destruction, planetary consequence. But the more important question is, what led to it? And again, Ra does not speculate. They describe. This Atlantean race was a very conglomerate social complex, which began to form approximately 31,000 years in the past. A long development, not a sudden rise, which means whatever happened took time. And then Ra adds something subtle, but critical. The Atlanteans became what you may call a very advanced technological society. Technological, not just spiritually aware, not just energetically sensitive, but capable. And capability changes things. Because once knowledge becomes application, it begins to interact with intention. And this is where Ra becomes very precise. They used intelligent energy in a less than positive manner. Now, let's slow that down a bit. Less than positive. Not evil, not wrong, just oriented differently. Because within this framework, there are no wrong paths. Only different ways of exploring consciousness. But orientation matters. Because when knowledge is paired with separation, it begins to behave differently. It stops being about understanding and starts becoming about use, about control, about influence, about directing energy not just in harmony with others, but in distinction from them. And again, this is not framed as a mistake. It is a path, a valid one. But when combined with advanced capability, that path begins to amplify itself. And amplification without balance creates instability. It's like handing a civilization a power source without asking what they plan to do with it. And eventually, that instability expresses itself, not philosophically, not symbolically, but physically, as conflict, as war, as energy turned against itself. And this is the pattern that begins to emerge. Not advanced civilization falls, but advanced capability plus increasing distortion leads to amplified consequence. And in the case of Atlantis, that consequence was final. At this point, we have 2 civilizations, both described as real, both far removed from recorded history, but their endings could not be more different. Lemuria and Atlantis, one harmonious but early, the other advanced and capable, and both gone, but not for the same reason. Lemuria, according to Ra, ended like this. It was a helpful and harmless place which was washed beneath the ocean during a readjustment of your sphere's tectonic plates through no action of their own. A planetary event, external, unrelated to their own choices, not caused by misuse, not caused by conflict, simply a shift in the Earth itself. And yet many survived, moved on, continued elsewhere. The civilization ended, but it did not destroy itself. Atlantis is different because it did not end due to the planet. It actually affected the planet. The cause and the effect are reverse, and that reversal matters because now the focus shifts from what happened to a civilization to what a civilization does. Lemuria lived in relative harmony and was interrupted. Atlantis developed advanced knowledge and then something changed. Not instantly, not completely, but enough. Enough to shift how that knowledge was used. And again, within this framework, there are no wrong paths, only different orientations. But different orientations interact with power in very different ways, and that interaction creates outcomes, not as punishment, not as judgment, but as consequence. And this is the contrast. One civilization was overtaken by the earth. The other reached a point where its actions began to affect the earth itself. And that's a very different kind of ending. Because one is something that happens to you, and the other is something that happens because of you. So, what do we do with this? Two civilizations, both real according to this material, both distant but not irrelevant, because this isn't really a story about the past, it's a pattern. And we discuss this pattern in almost every episode. It's as if there's a pattern. Lemuria lived in relative harmony and was ended by something external. Atlantis developed advanced knowledge and then began to use it differently. Not wrongly, not incorrectly, just differently. And within this framework, again, there are no wrong paths, only choices. But choices, especially when paired with power, don't remain neutral. They express, they amplify, they unfold, and eventually they become visible, not as philosophy, not as belief, but as outcome, which is a polite way of saying reality tends to keep receipts. And that's the uncomfortable part. Because if this pattern is real, then Atlantis isn't just a story about what happened. It's a story about what can happen to any civilization that reaches a certain level of capability without fully understanding what it's doing with it. Not because it's being judged, not because it's being punished, but because cause and effect don't disappear just because something is advanced. And maybe that's the quiet point behind all of this, that advancement isn't protection, knowledge isn't safety, and power doesn't come with direction. It only amplifies what's already there. And if that's true, then the real question isn't, did Atlantis exist? It's something else. What do you do when you have access to something powerful, but haven't fully decided why you're using it? Because according to this perspective, that answer doesn't just shape individuals, it shapes outcomes, sometimes quietly, sometimes slowly, and sometimes all at once. And apparently, some civilizations find out the hard way. Thank you for watching or listening. I wish you all love, light, peace, and joy. Take care.